Google underwent a lot of government scrutiny last year, and it doesn't look like this year is going to be any different. Late last year, U.S. Senators Herb Kohl and Mike Lee, who are both on the Senate's antitrust subcommittee, wrote a letter asking the FTC to investigate Google's business practices. The senators are specifically concerned that Google places its own properties above others in its results. In the letter, they said, quote, "Given the scope of Google's market share in general internet search, a key question is whether Google is using its market power to steer users to its own web products or secondary services and discriminating against other websites with which it competes," end quote. Even though the FTC is already investigating Google, the letter puts a greater emphasis on the areas in question. And while Google does have a lot of support, it also has critics. And these opponents, which include the coalition of companies known as FairSearch.org, praise the letter and the senator's action. And Ben Hammer of FairSearch.org is joining us now by way of Skype to talk about why the organization is taking such a strong position against the search company. Thanks for talking with us, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, FairSearch.org believes that Google is a search monopoly. So can you tell us what indicators basically lead to this assumption?
Sure. Well, FairSearch.org is a group of companies on the internet. Started out in the fall of 2011 after Google announced it was going to make a major acquisition in the travel sector. They were concerned about how Google could use its monopoly power on the internet to basically steer users to itself and away from all other competitors. And the original concern was whether that would tip the playing field in Google's favor and sort of upend the competition in travel search online that has brought lower prices to consumers, greater choice, and much greater sort of understanding and visibility of the flights that are available and the prices that consumers have at their fingertips. So the question that our group is focused on is now that authorities in the U.S., in the European Union, and around the world have already established that Google has monopoly power in search on the internet, is Google violating the law by abusing that power in ways that sort of tilt the playing field to itself and basically restrict the options that consumers on the internet have to find information and then also get all the benefits that come from competition on the internet?
Okay, I want to get into some of the issues specifically, but just to clarify the organization, it's basically several companies that have banded together in an effort to raise awareness of these claims, right?
Yeah, it's more than a dozen organizations and mostly companies in the U.S., in the U.K., and Southeast Asia. But, you know, it started in the U.S. and to date, most of the attention's been focused on the U.S. And the goal has been, like you said, to sort of raise awareness and the understanding of the power that Google has on the internet, how it uses that power, and also its responsibilities as having monopoly power on the internet to act in ways that don't unfairly and illegally advantage itself and harm everyone else on the internet.
Well, what makes FairSearch think that Google favors its products any more than any other search engine does?
Well, the group was formed by a number of companies that looked at how Google was already operating in other markets and were concerned about how they'd operate in travel. You know, as sort of those concerns got greater awareness and were validated in some ways by the U.S. Justice Department that was reviewing that merger, we continue to hear from other companies in markets outside of travel that said, we've experienced this firsthand. We know that Google, you know, takes our content and uses it to direct people back to their own services and away from ours. We know that Google puts links to its own products that compete with ours at the top of a page, eating up the most valuable real estate that people click on the most on its own pages. That makes it harder for us to get the traffic that we would normally get. We know in some cases that, you know, Google may bid against us in getting the most valuable advertising real estate on its own pages. So, you know, if you go to our site, FairSearch.org, you'll see a number of different ways that Google is being looked at now by authorities at the U.S. federal level, at the state level, by the European Commission, and by countries around the world for taking actions to help itself and really harm everyone else on the internet.
What about the other search engines like Yahoo and Bing? For instance, Bing banned its deal site, saying that they were thin content just before the holidays. So what are your thoughts on this?
I'm not familiar with what you're talking about, but this group has been focused from day one on what Google is doing with the monopoly power it has on the internet. One of the sort of principles of competition and consumer law is that once a company gains monopoly power in a market, they have undue influence over everything that happens in that market. And only with that kind of power can you then do certain things that disadvantage everyone else in a way that competition and innovation and consumer benefits can be upended permanently. So that's why a sort of higher standard and different standard is applied to companies like Google in their market and other companies that have monopoly power in other markets. And so there's a decision that was written by Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who's pretty conservative when it comes to a lot of issues, including enforcement of antitrust. And the basic idea he put forward was that once a company reaches monopoly power, it can do or it cannot do certain things in a market that other companies in a competitive market could do, because the forces of competition between them would sort of regulate the behavior between them. So that's sort of a complicated way of saying because Google has so much control over the market, really the only sort of real restriction on it is if it's going too far for people empowered with law enforcement authority to step in and take a close look, and if they find that they're going too far, to put an immediate stop to it.
So in your opinion, if Google really were fair, it wouldn't own over 60% of the search market share, and YouTube wouldn't be the second largest search engine?
That's really a separate issue. The real question is, does Google have monopoly power? The authorities have already decided that they are. So if they do, are they taking steps to use that power in ways that restrict competition and harm consumers? And we've, on our website and through our outreach at fairsearch.org, enumerated a number of different ways that Google takes actions that benefit itself, disadvantage other sites, restrict the information that consumers have access to through Google, and then oftentimes do it in ways that they don't disclose this to consumers, so they don't really have the benefit of deciding for themselves, am I really getting the full picture here, or are things being sort of manipulated that I don't really even know are going on. And if they're doing that in a way that gives them an advantage in keeping that monopoly power, or extending it to new areas like travel or maps or shopping or local search, that harms consumers and that harms the U.S. economy, because it doesn't get the full benefit of competition and what that brings. So, it may be that if Google's not doing these things, there's a more competitive market for search and all other online services, and that forces Google to be more competitive, to bring more innovative services to market, and it allows other new companies like a Kayak or an Expedia or a Travelocity that are members of our group to come into the business tomorrow and benefit consumers in ways they don't even know about yet.
Well, some people have argued that Google and its properties work better than some of the other offerings. So what would you say to these people?
I would say that they should have the benefit of full access and competition and the innovation that all those different companies bring, and they can choose for themselves. What our group argues from day one is not that Google shouldn't be allowed to compete, but that it should be allowed to compete fairly, and that when users pick the winners, they win, and the economy wins, and the U.S. wins. When Google decides that it's going to steer people to itself and tilt the playing field to itself, put its thumb on the scale, and harm every other competitor, they're basically deciding for you, and they're sort of pushing you to them and away from everyone else. And that's not how companies compete to deliver the best products. That's not how new companies and new services come about. That's basically how the market stagnates and how we lose as consumers and we lose as a technology industry.
So what would FairSearch like to see happen? I know that there are actually FTC guidelines in place for identifying things like one-box type results, which Google has, but does FairSearch think that these guidelines should be expanded?
Well, that's a separate sort of question that others are pushing. I mean, Google would like to say, well, this should be an industry-wide discussion. This should be something that the FTC should tell us what are the rules for everybody. What we've looked at from the beginning is, Google's may very well be breaking the law, right? If they have monopoly power, they shouldn't be allowed to do certain things in their search and business practices that push people to themselves and away from others. And we've laid out at FairSearch.org and in other places a number of things that they're doing with specific examples that companies have brought to us that have been reported in the news, that companies like Yelp and others have raised before Congress. And if authorities at the Federal Trade Commission and the European Commission in Europe, authorities in Korea and elsewhere, look and find evidence that Google's doing those things, that it's restricting trade, that it's harming consumers, that they force them to stop doing that and to act in a way that's more in line with the responsibility they have, that's an extra responsibility as a company with monopoly power in search.
So what efforts is the organization taking to get its message out?
Well, we've got a pretty robust website at FairSearch.org. It's got everything from a blog to some cartoons, both cartoon style and also animated videos that try to explain what we're talking about. Some things like a white paper that go into great detail about what Google's doing and how it advantages themselves and hurts others. Examples. And a lot of different sections on the different areas of harm that Google's engaged in to keep its search monopoly or its monopoly power in search, to move it beyond the general search power that they have with more than 70% of the market in the US and more than 90% in Europe, more than 98% of search on mobile devices, and to move beyond that into areas like basically eliminating step-by-step competition in online travel, in local search, and other areas where they're trying to collect a greater share of advertising dollars and other dollars on the internet and basically squeeze the lifeblood out of other companies that provide services for free or at a steep discount to consumers on the internet.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for talking with us and sharing these ideas. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. Reporting for WebProNews, I'm Abby Johnson.